Hey guys, this is Melissa with Love Covered Life, and today I'm going to be answering a question from my comments. How could the vast majority of Christians get this so wrong for 1500 years? How can the likes of John Piper and people like Francis Chan be so ignorant and continue to spout eternal conscious torment? But more importantly, how could God let the eternal conscious torment idea be prominent all this time? Why didn't God do a work in the hearts of his people and his theologians to snuff out this erroneous idea and even the word hell, a Norse goddess, before now? This is such a great question and it needs an answer, and I'm going to do my best to answer it today. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to talk to me in the comments and share your opinions with me and ask your questions and add anything that I miss. This is one of those questions that's really difficult to answer, and there are other people who could add so much more. So let me know what you think about this question. So we could apply this question to really anything that happens in the world that God allows. Specifically, we could apply it to other misunderstandings about God's character that have happened over time. For instance, the sacrificial system in ancient times, which was in effect for thousands of years, or the view that ancient people had of God being a vengeful, jealous, retributive, warlike being. Why did he allow these images of him to persist for so long? Or even more recently, why has God allowed the view of the atonement being one of retribution and God pouring out punishment on Jesus? The way I look at it is that God allows what is necessary for the awakening of our consciousness of God. He has always worked in the world in ways that are relevant to us where we are, and very rarely do we get the full revelation of what God is actually like when we look at various moves of God that have happened throughout time. That is what is so important about the revelation of God that we receive in Jesus, because Jesus is the perfect revelation of God. We could look at the institution of the sacrificial system and the giving of the law in the Old Testament. We could talk about the message given through Jeremiah, the establishment of various religions or denominations of Christianity, what happened in the Great Awakening, what happened in the Reformation. Very rarely are these anything near a perfect revelation of God. And the reason for that, I believe, is because God is working with us one step at a time, and he allows certain things because it's necessary for our developmental level. So these things are often easier to see when we look back on them. For instance, looking thousands of years back on the institution of the sacrificial system, why did God allow them to think that he wanted them to sacrifice animals for the forgiveness of their sins? Well, first of all, it was a way for them to deal with guilt. In those days, the gods and goddesses of the surrounding cultures basically acted like a bunch of spoiled toddlers, and they would curse somebody one moment and then turn around and bless them the next moment for no apparent reason, and you never knew what you were going to do that could anger the gods. God was working within the sacrificial system, which was just part of the culture of the time, to allow them to release their guilt and accept forgiveness. So specifically with the sacrifices that happened on the Day of the Atonement, when they put the sins of the nation on the goat, and then the goat was led out of the city into the wilderness, which is where we get the term scapegoat, a scapegoat. The goat escaped into the wilderness with the guilt of the people on the goat. The people were able to release their guilt, let it go, not have to worry about whether God was angry with them, and accept forgiveness and then live in peace with each other. At least that was the idea. Another way the sacrificial system was beneficial for them was that it allowed them to know that they had God's favor. And even though we do still see them attributing this spoiled toddler-like behavior to God throughout the Old Testament, the intention was to pull them out of that and help them to realize, hey, God is somebody that we can depend on. He's somebody that we can trust. His character doesn't go up and down with his moods depending on the moment. The third way that the sacrificial system was beneficial for those people was that the intention was to keep them from sacrificing each other and using each other as scapegoats. As we can clearly see reading through Old Testament history, it was not as successful as would have been hoped, because they did keep on backsliding into human sacrifice and sacrificing their children in worship of Molech. We sort of see this playing out in the story of Abraham offering Isaac, where God makes the very clear point: I do not want human sacrifice. I do not want child sacrifice. But because I know that you are immersed in a culture surrounded by sacrificial system and you're going to offer sacrifices, here, offer me a ram. Then when you get to the prophets, you see God clearly stating, I never wanted sacrifices. He even says in one place, I never spoke to them about sacrifices when I brought them out of Egypt. The only thing I said to them was, obey me and keep my commandments, and all will be well for you. And of course, what are his commandments? The Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. So God, all he has ever wanted from us, the only sacrifice he has ever wanted from us, is a life lived in loving service of God and our neighbor. But we have misunderstood that, and he has allowed that for our growth to take us from this place where we believe that God acts like a spoiled, rotten 2-year-old and could be angry and strike us down at any moment, and pull us out of that place into understanding, okay, God is someone I can trust. God forgives me and I can accept his forgiveness, even if it is through this broken and imperfect sacrificial system. God works with us where we are to take us step by step to the next level. So I really love how Aaron Abke answers this question. I don't remember exactly which video I heard him say this in. He has a lot of really great videos, so I'll link something below for you guys. But when he gets asked the question, well, why did people have to go through the sacrificial system, or why did they believe in an angry, vengeful God for thousands of years? His answer is, that's like asking, why did I have to go through second grade? That's just the level that collectively humanity was at that point. There's nothing good or bad about it. There's no shame in it. It's just part of the growth process. So now we are still in the midst of coming out of the whole eternal conscious torment belief. So it's harder to look at that and see what was the purpose that it was used for. But I would say that collectively we are now coming out of a level of consciousness where we have not been able to be motivated by love and joy and inspiration. We have been very easily motivated by fear for the last several hundred years at least, if that makes sense. And because of that, we have created these doctrines that sort of scare us into the right belief system. Looking at the work of men like Jonathan Edwards, Martin Luther, John Calvin, the many thousands of people who came to God under their teaching, obviously that teaching resonated with those people. So motivation by consequence, punishment and reward, or motivation by fear of punishment and consequence is a specific level of spiritual development, and it is one that we are now moving past collectively, I would like to think. And I do believe that this is happening, even though there's definitely a lot of turmoil in the world right now. But turmoil is always a part of awakening. And we can see both within and outside of the Christian church this massive awakening to love happening. Of course, we still see people trying to politicize it. We see people trying to create religious doctrine around it and all this stuff. And there's going to be extremes and there's going to be backtracking. But at the heart of it, we see a huge move towards love. I think that even though there are prominent teachers who are still teaching eternal conscious torment and things like penal substitutionary atonement theory, I think, at least based off of my personal experience in the church, and I know this is just anecdotal, I think that most Christians actually believe in their heart of hearts that God is far more loving than their doctrine allows them to believe. Look at the songs that we sing. If any of you follow contemporary Christian music or worship music, you will see these songs making these statements about God making all things right and about how God can never fail and how the story is not over if it's not good. And I can't quote any of these songs verbatim for copyright reasons, but if any of you follow Christian music, you know exactly which songs I'm talking about. And the majority of the message that we are putting out into the world now as a whole is about the love of God and is about God's power to reconcile and restore and make all things right. And I think that in our heart of hearts, we know this is true. What we need in the church is we need a reform of doctrine, because what we actually believe and feel and experience about God to be true is sort of being reined in and held back by the doctrine that we're told we have to believe to be part of the religious establishment. But I'm getting off track a little bit away from the question here, but basically all of this to say that it's the evolution of our consciousness and understanding of God. It's our awakening. So we are each awakening individually to God, and then we are collectively awakening to God. And right now we are going through another major awakening process of going fear-based motivation to love-based motivation. And God allowed that fear-based motivation for a time to accomplish certain purposes, some of which we may not be able to see because it was taking them from the level that they were at to the level that we are at now. It has served the purpose of getting us there. One way to understand this might be to compare it to discipline in parenting. So as a parent, I much prefer to use tools in my disciplines such as modeling, role-playing, education, inspiration, reasoning. You can't use them with kids until they're older because they don't have the mental and emotional capacity to be able to reason or think abstractly or walk through potential situations. Say my daughter, when she was 4 years old, snuck her tablet into her room, then an appropriate response might be for me to take the tablet away and not allow her to use it for a week. And at 4 years old, she might think, wow, mommy's so mean, she's such a monster. Now my same daughter at 8 years old, which is the age she is now, has the spiritual and mental capacity to bring me her tablet when she's done something wrong and say, hey mom, I probably shouldn't have this for a week. So it's just different levels of development. Another example could be if your 2-year-old keeps reaching for the knobs on the stove and trying to mess with them and turn them around when you're in there cooking, you might have to gate your 2-year-old out of the kitchen so that they don't hurt themselves. But they're going to think, wow, she's abandoned me, and throw a huge fit for the next hour until dinner is ready because they don't understand. That same child at 6 can easily understand I can't play with the stove. If I do that, I could cause a fire and I could end up in the hospital. First of all, different types of discipline will be allowed to suit the level of development, but also our understanding can be very flawed, and we can read things into what the parent or what God is doing. So my 2-year-old's gonna think, oh, mommy, she's so mean. She abandoned me in this living room. I can't get to her. And there's probably nothing I can do to convince them that I'm not mean. They're still gonna think what they think about me. These might seem like really simplistic examples. I know that things are a lot more complex in the real world. My point is that it's different levels of spiritual development, and we are all growing and awakening. And I know for myself, I was raised in an extremely spiritually oppressive environment. And guys, I was depressed for 20 years. I was depressed to the point of being suicidal. I was so screwed up emotionally and socially that I could not carry on a conversation with even an adult that I knew until I was in my mid-20s. I just could not get outside of myself. I was so retracted. It took decades of intense inner work for me to be able to get to the point where I am today, and I'm still on the journey. But looking back on all that, I wouldn't change a thing. The highlight of my entire life has been that moment when the veil fell off my eyes and I remembered who God was, and I began to awaken to the truth of who He was. I have tried, and I just don't know how to put this into words. That process of starting in such darkness and having the scales just come off my eyes, having one awakening after another, and realizing, oh, this is who God is. God is love. Oh, this is who God is. He doesn't torment people forever. Oh, wait a minute. This is who God is. He wasn't pouring out wrath on the cross. He was taking our wrath on the cross. This is who God is. I can't be eternally lost. I'm held in His arms forever, and having that moment of remembering that, I wouldn't change it for anything. And I'm only speaking for myself. I can't speak for anybody else with this, but the awakening process is so incredibly beautiful. And you guys, it's why I have this channel, because I have to share it. I have to talk about it. One last thing I would say is that although Eternal Conscious Torment has been the majority view of Protestants and Catholics, Eastern Orthodox does not hold a strict view of Eternal Conscious Torment. Their position is more that hell is the fire of the purifying love of God, and that it is possible that all will be reconciled, although they don't take a definitive answer on that. Certainly, if you look at other major world religions, you don't see a view of eternal conscious torment in the afterlife. Muslims are the other ones that I believe they argue about whether or not hell is eternal or restorative. Jews certainly don't believe in eternal conscious torment. So when you think about the religious spectrum as a whole, eternal conscious torment has been only in specific groups. Why did God allow it? He allowed it in certain circles where it was probably relevant and useful for specific purposes for a time, just like He allows many things, but He is bringing us out of that now. Anyway, that is my best answer to that question. I'm just one person with one viewpoint, and as Ken Barber pointed out in my comments a couple days ago, and I thought this was so good. Any explanation that we try to give of God is going to be limited because it has to make sense to our limited minds. And really, God is so far beyond anything that we can comprehend or understand. So that's just my best attempt at answering that question. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Be loved, be happy, be at peace, and thank you for watching.